Speaking of slime, I am proud to live in a country where Rush Limbaugh still has a job, but for some reason, Keith Olbermann does not. If you want a career in broadcasting, the takeaway from all this is you can bash Arabs, gays, blacks, and women. Just don't say anything nasty about your boss. That boss being the head of Current TV, Al Gore. Apparently the reason Al Gore is so uncomfortable in his own skin is because it's so thin. Keith Olbermann, in case you don't know about this, has been fired from Current TV. Wait, we're talking about Current TV, so you don't know about this. Current TV is owned by Vice President Al Gore, who is attempting to build an alternative to Fox News. And by that I mean Current TV is fact-based and incredibly boring. Remember Al Gore? He would have made a great president, but you just didn't want to have a beer with him. So we gave the White House to George W. Bush because Bush was someone you did want to have a beer with. And ever since Bush became president, we've needed all the beer we can get our hands on. So we all wanted to have a beer with Bush, who ironically didn't drink, but guess who did? Al Gore. That's right, Al Gore, hence the bloat. In fact, Al's middle name is Alcoholic. Al Gore is one of the most stiff and humorless people ever to strut the political stage, so it makes perfect sense that he would end up owning a television network. Just another empty suit you got to pitch to. Anyway, Olbermann was making $6 million a year, but he wasn't happy. Olbermann says he wasn't happy because Current TV is an unprofessional operation fraught with technical mishaps and no budget for promotion. Keith, maybe Current TV would have been a more professional operation if they didn't have to pay you $6 million a year. $6 million a year, and all Keith Olbermann was able to deliver was 100,000 viewers. Now, I like Keith Olbermann, Thurber Fridays notwithstanding. I think he was one of the bravest news personalities during the Bush administration. Took enormous testicles to go after Cheney and Bush when he did. And Keith had those testicles, and for that I will always think fondly of him and his testicles. Unfortunately, in order to take on our president's misguided war while working for General Electric, a defense contractor that was making billions off the Iraq folly, it also took an enormous ego, an enormous belief in oneself. We need egomaniacs like Keith Olbermann, but the ego is a cancerous beast, and no amount of money, success, or respect could sate Keith Olbermann's bottomless need. Just because you're right, Keith Olbermann, doesn't mean you're not morally bankrupt, which I think Keith Olbermann ultimately is. Wherever he goes, there's a fight. He's unpleasant to be around. It's not a problem with authority figures. It's a problem with other people. I don't think Keith Olbermann, the progressive man of the people, really cares that much about people. You never hear anyone saying what a great guy Keith Olbermann is. Yes, Keith Olbermann was on the right side of history, against the invasion of Iraq, against the Patriot Act. He was for Obama, not McCain. But in the end, Keith Olbermann was always in the Keith Olbermann business, which is okay. But you just get the sense he wasn't nice to the people who worked for him. You got the sense that he didn't care what the people who were just trying to help him do his job, he didn't care what they had to say. You just got the sense that everything was about Keith Olbermann. And in the end, that just makes you a boring TV personality. And even worse, yes, there's something even worse than being boring on TV. Even worse, it makes you a bad human being. And I think Keith Olbermann is a bad human being. Maybe it has something to do with his being in his 50s and not being married and not having kids. Maybe it has something to do with living in a vacuum where all you hear is how good you are. But I always got the feeling that somebody needed to sit Keith Olbermann down and say, get over yourself. Or at the very least, stop reading James Thurber on your show. We get it, James Thurber, you're erudite, and we're not. But I also see Keith Olbermann as the victim of the network news star system. The network news star system is insidious, and it destroys the news and its stars. Rather than turn MSNBC or Current TV into a world-class news-gathering operation, the executives over there take the easy way out and hire personalities to carry their shows so that ratings rise and fall based on whether or not the audience likes the hosts, as opposed to ratings rising and falling depending on whether or not the audience can depend on MSNBC or Current TV to deliver news. It's cowardice. The star system is cowardice. The star system in news is in place so the faceless executives, the pimps, get to blame the stars and not themselves for the failures of their news operations. To pinch from Edward R. Murrow, who Keith Olbermann pinched so much, the fault, dear Brutus, is not with our stars, but with our news. The star system allows news executives to claim, it's not my fault nobody's watching, it's Katie Couric's fault. And the more you pay that star, the more resentment is deflected towards the star for making all that money, and less is directed at the news executives, the pimps, who should be running legitimate news-gathering operations. Remember when CBS News fired all those reporters so they could pay Katie Couric's salary? Whose fault was that? Not Katie Couric's. The star system in news creates a series of high-profile fall guys, high-paid saps, from Connie Chung to Dan Rather to Katie Couric to Bryant Gumbel, TV journalists who fail to deliver an audience and then garner all the blame for their large salary. Here's a suggestion. If you have $6 million to spend on somebody like Keith Olbermann, take that $6 million and instead open up 30 news bureaus around the world and tell us what's going on. People will watch. Now look, I like Keith Olbermann. He's the victim here of the star system and his own ego. But basically, all he ever did was rewrite the Daily Kos. If you went to the Daily Kos in the morning, dailykos.com, you could pretty much predict all the points Keith would be making that evening. I'm being serious here. That's what $6 million got you, Al Gore, a sportscaster who thought he was Edward R. Murrow because he knew how to rewrite the Daily Kos. Hire real reporters, not ex-sportscasters like Keith Olbermann who treat politics as a sporting event. Open up news bureaus. If Katie Couric's move to CBS or Dan Rather prematurely replacing Walter Cronkite or Bryant Gumbel coming to CBS, if any of that taught us anything, it's that no journalist, not a single journalist, is worth $6 million a year. Now, you know who's worth $6, even $60 million a year? Rush Limbaugh. Because Rush Limbaugh started his own business. Rush Limbaugh, as rancid a man as he is, he built a loyal audience on his own, with no bureaucracy, no network, no support staff. He did it all by himself. That's why the networks need a little more self-respect when it comes to their news. We watch these networks for the news, for their imprimatur, not because of their stars. We watch it because of their news-gathering operation. Dan Rather, Olbermann, Kirk, Diane Sawyer appear to be stars because they are supposedly fronting a world-class news operation. But you can put a trained chimp in there to read the news if the news is being written, produced, and reported by real journalists. The most successful newscast in the history of journalism is 60 Minutes because it's real journalism. Nobody tunes into 60 Minutes because of Leslie Stahl or Morley Safer, although Morley Safer is hot. They tune in because it's well-produced and it's real news. Journalists shouldn't be stars. You're going to get burned every time you think you can boost ratings by paying one anchorman all the money and then paying his salary by cutting back on the news-gathering operation. Give us news, and you'll get ratings. Good night and good luck, which Keith Olbermann stole from Edward R. Murrow, along with $6 million from Current TV.